Hello and welcome to Scale Stuff. In this week's video I'm going to be building and reviewing the Tamiya old style Triceratops Eurycephalus. The latter part of this weird word, which I think I said wrong, means the wide-headed, which was something new I learnt whilst making this video. The model is in 1/35 scale. I fancied a bit of a creative break, so I'm making a dinosaur again. This video is probably going to be released earlier than some of the others I've made, but in between making another dinosaur I've probably done about 50 tanks and planes, so I figured it was time to treat myself to an unplanned play with the paints. Being the old version trike, this dinosaur's really not accurate by modern standards, but I'm going to try and give it a paint job that's in line with some of the newer theories kicking about nowadays about how this iconic dinosaur looked when it was alive. Anyway, before we get to the painting, we need to build this thing. So first, let's take a look at what's in the box. In the box, you get a simple set of sprues to build the dinosaur, and a very short black and white instruction sheet. So there's not much in this kit, but I've bought it for a relaxing paint, so it fits the build perfectly for me right now. A first quick look at the sprues is showing that classic but now slightly dated trike shape. To be honest, the old style Triceratops has probably aged quite well compared to the other dinos like the T-Rex that have had quite a revisit to their physique over the years. The sprues are showing a little bit of flash and some nice skin texture, but I'm noticing some details like toenails are missing on the parts. Looking at the layout, I'm already suspecting quite a seamline cleanup session and maybe a bit of filler. This is a 2001 re-release of a kit that dates back to 1980, so for a model kit of this time, it's looking pretty typical. Anyway, without further ado, let's get on with the build. First thing I'm doing is building the body. A quick dry fit is showing that the fit isn't that great and will need a bit of filling later, as I suspected. The bits fit together okay though, but the head and tail want to open up a bit, so I'm taping them up while they dry. While the body's drying, I'm going to make the head. Again, this is a nice simple two-part construction, but there is quite a bit of a seam line on this that's probably also going to need filling and sanding, which I suspected will be a theme on the build if the first two parts have been like this. So yeah, I'm not adding the horns yet, as the seam line will be much easier to sort out without horny bits getting in the way. With the head and body built while dry fitting, I've noticed something. This model does not have a tongue or rear to the mouth, so this model's mouth opens up to a vast cavern behind it. Not being funny, but I'm not having that on one of my models. Man's got to have standards, and a hollow trike's one step too far. So I'm going to mix up some green stuff to fill this gap in and make some basic details for here. First, by giving the lower beak a base. I'm no trike expert, but I'm hoping this area would just be beak, as this basic filler job would then be accurate. I'm doing the same on the upper palette, but here I'm trying to tap in a few ridges. Not that these will likely be seen, but having something there is better than nothing. Speaking of something there, a small bit of package has ended up in the green stuff, which hopefully the paint will hide. Next, it's time to make a tongue for the trike. My sculpting skills are basic, but I think I can just about manage a tongue. It wasn't until I finished making this that I remembered you're meant to use baby oil to stop green stuff sticking to your fingers. So yeah, that's a top tip if you want to try doing this at home. I'm not sure if a trike's tongue would be on show as much as this, but I'm adding it to fill in the hole at the rear of the mouth. Details wise, I'm just going to score a groove down the middle and leave it at that. With the tongue in, I'm adding the top of the head to the main body, just to check that everything fits and make sure everything dries in the right place. While I'm here, I'm also filling in a bit of a gap under the jaw. With the head now on though, it's time to add some fleshy bits to the corners of the mouth, as the mouth looks a bit undefined, and adding these bits seems to make it look better. As a side note, I spent a good while looking at the sick trike in Jurassic Park scene for an idea of what to do here. With the head on, I'm going to leave this to dry for a good while so the green stuff's safer to handle. Now while the body's drying, I'm building the legs. All of these parts are simple two-part constructions. They go together okay, but the same as the rest of the trike, the parts have small gaps in them that will need filling. I've not bothered cleaning the attachment tabs off here, as they'll be a reminder to me that these bits also need sanding. But yeah, I can't do that at the moment. I've got to wait for the legs to dry. On some of these gaps, as the model's an organic creature, I tried over gluing the gaps to fill them in, but yeah, this didn't work. But yeah, it also didn't damage any of the textures or wreck the seam lines, so you know, it was worth a shot. While the legs are drying, I'm sanding off the seam lines on the body. There were also a couple of seam line marks behind the frill that needed removing here. Although this model's not modern accurate, I'm really looking forward to painting this model now. Looking at all that skin texture and lumpy scales, it should take paint really well. Another area though that needs work here is the beak. The two side bits don't fit together perfectly, so I'm redefining the beak with a little bit of green stuff. Now I'm moving on to sorting out the legs. Here I'm using more green stuff for a change to fill in some of the gaps before sanding. I'm going to need to come back here with more green stuff later to add some toenails, but first it's cleanup time. I get the feeling there is going to be a lot of green stuff in this model by the time I'm done. Off screen, I sanded down these areas as there wasn't really much to show. Next, I'm sorting out the feet on the model with yet more green stuff. Here I'm just adding a little blob to each toe tip, then flattening it down to make a nail. I'm no master sculptor, but this will do, and hopefully all of these little details will go a long way to getting this trike model to look its best. Ironically, I built this model after a tricky F14 Tomcat build that needed loads of filling done to it. Yeah, it kind of burnt me out creatively. And yeah, then I get this model to relax, and it's got more green stuff than model in it. So yeah, out of the fire and into the frying pan. No, out of the frying pan and into the fire. Now, with the toes done, it's time to add the limbs to the main body. These go on all right, but might need some green stuff around the seams just to help them blend in a bit easier with the rest of the model, which is covered in green stuff. The front legs are only attached by pegs that allow them to spin around, so I'm going to leave this to dry on a flat surface so the dinosaur doesn't end up all wobbly when it's dry. Next, it's on to adding the horns, making this humpback lizard into a proper Triceratops. The horns need some seam lines cleaning up, but they drop into place quite well, despite being only peg attachment points. Finally, I'm going around the model with green stuff, just for old time's sake really at this point, to sort out the joins between the legs and the body. These bits are not too bad, but I feel a bit of green stuff will remove the slight step in between these parts that the paint will inevitably highlight later on. With that done though, that's the build stage complete on this Green Stuffosaurus Rex. Now it's onto the painting. For the base coat I'm using Humbrol 237 Desert Tan, as it will be a nice light base coat, easy to wash and light enough to go over with most colours without any fuss. As always, I'm spraying this up off screen and outside to avoid fumigating myself. With the paint dry, it's onto the trike's first wash. For this I'm using BS Dark Earth and painting this wash over the entire model. This is really already starting to bring up some of the details on the kit. While the first wash is still wet, I'm going to give the model its second wash. Doing this while the first wash is wet will blend the colours together much more naturally than it would do if the first coat was dry. For this second wash, I'm using BS Dark Earth mixed with black. It just makes a dark muddy brown. I'm applying this to the raised areas of the trike to give it some counter shading that most animals today seem to display. Some of the paint's got knocked off my improv toes though, so I need to make sure to use a solid paint coat on these to hide that error a little bit later down the line. I'd pick up the model to show you it at this point, but as it's still wet, my handling options are limited. Then it's on to adding some green to the trike. For this I'm using US dark green as it's just kicking about on the desk. With this coat I'm putting a thin coat onto the upper surfaces. I imagine that these dinosaurs spent a lot of time grazing, so some greenery in their hide would make some sense from a camouflage perspective. I'm liking how the model's taking a coat of paint. It has a very retro look to it, almost looks like it's based off some of the old stop motion dinosaurs that they used to use in movies. Next, it's on to sorting out the horny bits on the dinosaur. For this, I'm using skeleton bone and painting this onto the horns and beak of the dinosaur as a base coat. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to paint the horns at the moment, but a light base coat will probably make whatever goes on later a bit brighter. I'm also painting the nails on the dinosaur in this colour, and yeah, giving the belly a light dry brush with this as well, just to give it a bit of highlights and a bit more interest. Before I put the skeleton bone away, I also give the frill horns and frill bit a bit of a hit with this, just to keep everything on theme. I'm hoping this skeleton bone will be a good base coat for some frill mating colours. The current thinking is that dinosaurs would have had some areas made of the same stuff as birds' beaks, possibly for display or status signalling, so it's reasonably logical to think that these areas would be quite bright, using modern birds' beaks as a guide. This could be anything from blue to orange, but I'm thinking I'll paint mine orange at the moment. But yeah, that could change as more paint goes onto the model. It's kind of painting itself, if I'm honest with you. Next, it's on to sorting out the trike's mouth. Here at the moment, I'm just giving this area a coat of Army Painter Barbarian flesh. More will need to be done here, but for now, this is all the attention I'm giving this spot. Now it's on to putting a base coat on the eye. Here again, I'm doing just a simple base coat using Army Painter Demonic Yellow. When it comes to finishing the eye, later on I'll add a pupil, but not yet. Next it's time to give the dino a bit of a feature. Here I'm painting the frill in a light coat of mythical orange. I'm not going to blot this out completely, just make a sort of pattern on the frill, something to give the model some interest rather than a fat greeny brown lump lizard. I'm really liking how this orange is making the model look, so naturally I'm going to get a bit carried away with this orange and do more. When it came to adding the paint to the body, I decided to just add blobs of orange all over the upper half of the flanks of the Triceratops. However, on the body, I dabbed off more paint so the orange was a little less bright. Like the creature had the pigment in its system for orange, but the frill was the main area this presented as a signal for mating purposes. So yeah, it would show off brighter there than on the rest of the animal. The dinosaur's really starting to come together now, but I need to leave it to dry and have a think on what I'm going to do next. Now it's on to painting the black, first by getting the eye sorted on the model. Once the pupil's in place, I move on to get some watered down black into the nose to give it some shadow. I'm also painting this onto the frill of the trike to set the orange off a bit more. At first I went in a little bit too heavy with this black paint as it's quite overpowering and yeah, it didn't look natural. So what I ended up doing was adding a bit more brown to the black and lots of water to keep this black coat more within the realms of nature. Where I had gone on a bit strong in the past, I built up a few washes to kind of fade it out and tone everything into each other. I'm really liking how the Triceratops is looking so far, as yeah, I believe the colour scheme's really starting to come together. In the interest of keeping the model tied together, I also went over the trike's back in this black wash, and then went around picking out all the creases and shadows in the dinosaur's hide. Next it's time to do more black, this time using oil paints to work on adding a bit of interest to the horns and frilly bits. I'm just using black oil paint here, painting all of these areas in a base coat of this, and trying to work out sort of what I want to do with this. I've got loads of pictures of bull horns up on the PC to my side, and I'm wanting to do something that fades like all of these horns show. Once the paint's on, it's time to wax on, wax off the stuff. Here I'm wiping away from the base to give all the horns and bony bits a black root to light tip. I'm also using a ruined brush to try and impart some line texture onto the horns, but yeah, it's not working as much as I wanted. Like I always say though, when using oils, the great thing here is they take ages to dry, so you can always change the look of the oil paint if you need to, as long as you do it within 2 days. After painting oils on the frill and horns, I've made the head a little bit darker than the rest of the dinosaur, so I'm adding some more black oil paint to the back of the creature. That's what I love about painting with these organics. You start out with an idea, and then once the paint starts to fall, the model paints itself. I'm just going along with what fits for the model, and yeah, sometimes this leads you down some really interesting routes, and you never know what you're going to get. Like with the horns, I'm rubbing the oil paint off the body with some tissue to blend it into the rest of the model. The trike's looking pretty good so far, but the mouth area is standing out like a plain sore thumb that needs to get addressed next, I think. First thing I'm going to sort out with the mouth is the little bits of skin towards the back scissors of the mouth. I'm going to give these a quick dry brush with white just to lighten them up. The tongue has a few errors on it, so I'm going to have to top this up with more pink so it's ready for the next step. While the mouth's drying, I'm sorting out a bit more on the orange. First, doing a little line around the eyes to give them more detail. Off screen, I'm also going to add a little white dot to the corner of the pupil to give it a bit of reflected light. But yeah, it's not enough to justify a whole filming segment, and it's fiddly, so I need both hands and to brace the model, so I can't really film it properly. Then it's back onto the frill to brighten them up a bit, as I think the black wash dulled them back a little more than I wanted. Now the mouth's dry, I'm painting a bit of Tamiya X27 clear red over the tongue. With this, I'm going to water it down a bit so it's not pure red. This paint has a gloss finish and will hopefully make the mouth look a bit more alive. Now, in the same vein as the previous step, I'm going over the eyes with Tamiya X25 clear green. Again, this is gloss, so it will give the eyes the right look. Next, it's time to give the dinosaur a bit of muck. For this, I'm using BS Dark Earth again and dabbing it over the feet to darken them down and make them look a bit muddy, as I've kind of forgotten about the feet throughout most of the painting, and they've ended up a little bit lighter than I would like. Finally, I'm going to give the trike a bit of MIG wet mud around its feet and lower legs to make it look like it's been wallowing in a pool all day and just come up out of the water. I've not got the MIG wet mud splashes out in a while and forgot how thick the stuff was. I'm not using it thick though, I'm lightly dabbing this on, so it's still a bit semi-transparent so you can see the colour of the dinosaur through it, as I don't want to completely coat the model in it and like just black it out with brown mud. With the feet mucked up though, I think I'm going to call this model done. This is the finished model. I've really enjoyed painting this Triceratops. As always, it's nice to let the model paint itself for a change and not have to worry about straight lines or following a paint scheme. Just get the paints out, have a bit of fun and see where you end up. In conclusion, the Tamiya 1/35 scale Triceratops is an okay kit. It's got a few issues with it though. Clearly the model itself is an older model with its dated dinosaur frame and lots of gaps in the build. If you just got this out of the box and threw it together, the model would likely end up looking a bit rubbish, as you really need filler to complete this model build properly. The kit is mindlessly easy to build and would be a nice practice piece for anyone wanting to practice filling holes in on models though, as on a scaly beast such as this, fingerprints and errors are easily lost in the texture of the animal's skin. The gap behind the mouth's also a bit of a letdown on the kit and probably the worst area of the model. I did enjoy making the tongue and side bits for the dinosaur however, and feel that if you do get this kit and are willing to put the work in, it does build into a good looking retro Triceratops model that I personally have had a lot of fun painting. Costing £9 brand new, the model is an okay price for what you get in the kit, but if you can get it for less than this, then this kit is well worth the money, for what I would see as a reasonably priced paleo paint mule. Anyway, that's my build and review of the Tamiya 1/35 scale Triceratops. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you made it this far, please consider subscribing, as it really helps the channel out. Until next time though, look after yourselves and have a good one. Goodbye.